Hey everybody, so as I mentioned a while back in a previous video, I recently finished the last Stephen King book on my list that I needed to read. Now I've read all of them, and it's a really cool feeling, and I've been thinking a lot about his works, categorizing them, best ofs, most overrated, most underrated, stuff like that. And today I'm going to do a ranking video of a sort. It's a ranking video that includes one book, but it holds a place of distinction. This book that I'm going to talk about holds the record for my least favorite Stephen King novel of all time. It is the only one that I actively hate and loathe. And in this video, I'm going to try to make a logical argument as to why that is. So they say that the opposite of love is not hate. The opposite of love is indifference. And as I was nearing the end of my Stephen King journey, reading all the books, I was thinking about my least favorite, my bottom 5, my bottom 10. And, to me, there's always something noteworthy and worthwhile about any Stephen King book. And at best, my bottom 5 would have been, the top 5 books that I feel indifferently about. The opposite of love. I don't have a passion for them. There are some books, like The Colorado Kid, for instance, that, I think is just pretty half-baked, and it ranks down toward the bottom of my list overall of all time. And I don't actively hate it. I just feel sort of indifferent toward it. And I thought that that would probably be the best that I would ever be able to come up with in terms of negative feelings for a Stephen King book, until just this last year I listened to the audiobook of a novel, and it absolutely drove me crazy. And I know that hate is a neighbor to love, in that I have passion. I don't feel indifferent. I have passionate feelings about this book. It's just that my feelings are not of love, they are of loathing. So, my least favorite, the only Stephen King book that I actively hate, Rose Matter, from 1995. I'm second guessing myself. Yeah, 1995. Rose Matter. So, I had started this book years ago. I think when I was a teenager, I may have started the book. And if you've ever read Rose Matter, I should say this actually, if you haven't read Rose Matter, this video is all spoilers, just wall-to-wall spoilers. So you may want to stop now. Fair warning. But when I started it years ago, it's a bit of a different type of Stephen King novel. It's a story of domestic violence in the beginning, and I got as far as the scene where Norman forces Rose, oh my gosh, I can't even remember the characters' names. When Norman forces Rose to miscarry. And then I stopped. And I never went back to the book, and I only did it in the last year because I was going on this journey to do all the books. And I started it, and I had a sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach, kind of like I did when I reread Cujo, and I knew how that one ended, except at least this one starts that way, so I knew it wouldn't take long to get to that point, and then I would be interested to see what came after. So it is painful almost to read, And it's so cruel and brutal, and Norman forces Rosie to miscarry by punching her around, beating her up, and she loses her baby. And that scene is so ghastly, so horrible to read. And Stephen King asks so much of the reader right out of the gate. I mean, it's within the first 50 pages or less that this happens. He has so much. It's so disturbing that to keep going, one has to take a big leap of faith. And the reason that I hate Rose Matter is that I think Stephen King doesn't repay that leap of faith. So it starts out okay. So Rosie endures more years of abuse at the hands of Norman, many years. And then one day she just reaches her breaking point. A single drop of blood on a sheet is what suddenly it snaps, and she runs away. And I think Stephen King was onto something very compelling with this portion. I found it very exciting. I was pulling for Rosie. I was terrified for her, but I was pulling for her when she takes off. She's pretty clever, and Norman is a cop, so of course he has techniques and he has knowledge and he has ways of finding information. But Rosie does a pretty good job. She takes off, she escapes, and she ends up at a shelter for battered women where she starts to rebuild her life. And that part, it's a different kind of story than anything Stephen King had told before or since. It almost feels like a Bachman book because it's just kind of lean and mean, and it cuts to the chase. And I found that part of it very compelling. And I knew that Norman was going to start chasing her down. and I was okay with that too. I thought that it could be a very straightforward sort of thriller story about a battered woman escaping her husband, facing him down, confronting him, overpowering him, truly like defeating her monster, taking control of her life, and starting a new chapter. I think if Stephen King had gone all in with that angle, if that was the novel that he had written, it could have ranked as one of his best. But the part that I normally actually kind of enjoy in other Stephen King novels, the supernatural element that comes in, I think kind of ruins Rose Matter. So what I need for Rosie to have done, her arc, would be to find the strength within herself to confront Norman and to defeat him and move on, or find some closure or something. But a supernatural element enters into the story, and Norman slowly goes just batshit crazy, and he gets crazier and crazier as the book goes on, so much so that he becomes almost more of a cartoon character than a human being and a real flesh and blood villain. That's one of the aspects that just ruins Rose Matter for me. Norman starts wearing a bull mask, and he starts uttering things like "Viva the Bull," and the dialogue is funny. I mean, it's almost funny. And in the audiobook, it's really interesting because Stephen King himself actually narrates Norman, and when he narrates, it is funny. So, but Norman is not supposed to be funny. Norman is a monster, and Stephen King, like a human monster, and Stephen King starts things off so hardcore and so painfully that he's set himself a big task, and then he cheats, and he cheapens his story as it goes along. So Norman slowly devolves into just this crazy, like, over the top, hilarious, weird, like, maniac guy. So his story arc is kind of ruined. And then Rosie, the supernatural element, takes over. And ultimately, Rosie is not able to defeat her monster on her own. She needs to lure him in to this other world, to this supernatural world, where finally Norman does meet his demise. But she wasn't, so the feeling I had when I was reading it was, but she wasn't able to do this herself. She still needed someone to come to her rescue for this to happen. And I mean, Norman is still dangerous, very dangerous, and still scary, but I don't know, the tone of Norman just goes so off the rails as the novel wears on. Like I said, he's almost like a cartoon rather than a person. So what started out very, very dark, very bleak, and very realistic becomes this broad, there's so many cop-outs too, like the magical painting, the other world, like all of that is, it just cheapens the impact of what could have been if Rose Matter had followed its original trajectory and just gone there. It could have been brilliant. And I think that's one of the things that gets me so upset about it. One of the things that I hate about it the most is that I clearly see the novel that it could have been, and it truly could have been one of the greats. But instead, it's just a mess. And, you know, like the Colorado Kid is kind of a half-baked mystery without a conclusion. You know, so I read it and I'm like, oh, yeah, okay, I'm kind of getting into it, and then there's no resolution to the mystery. Okay, whatever. I just feel like I wasted some of my time, but I'm moving on. It wasn't compelling to begin with. Rose Matter is very compelling to begin with, and it just spoils its potential so epically that, I don't know, that first scene, the miscarriage scene, now that I've gone through all of Stephen King's books, it is, you know, maybe hands down the single most disturbing, scariest thing that he's ever written, because it's based in reality. It's based in something that real people actually go through. You know, the scene with the lady in the bathtub in The Shining is really, really scary, but little boys in empty hotels generally don't find reanimated corpses of dead women in bathtubs, right? So there's always that sense of like, this isn't real, this isn't real. Well, Rose Matter feels very real, and then it shifts from being very real to being very, very fake. And I just actively despise the novel. And I didn't want to necessarily do this video so early on in my process of ranking and reconsidering and all of that, but I just have to get it out because it's been months since I finished it, and I still actively hate it. And it's literally the only Stephen King book that I've ever read, listened to, anything that I feel that way about. If there's one redeeming quality to the experience, like I said, I listened to the audiobook, and Stephen King is really, really interesting and entertaining as Norman. It's just a shame that, you know, the content that he created, that he reads, just jumps the shark so badly. But anyway, part of the process, I've been surprised along the way, listening and reading to these books. I've seen things with fresh eyes. I've had my mind changed about different things, but one thing that I just can't shake is that this book is The Pits, and I just wanted to tell you all about it. And I know that it's divisive. I have heard some people, I've read comments from some people who just love this book. They think it's great, and I think that that is wonderful, and that's one of the coolest things about Stephen King, is that the universe is so broad. He's written so many stories, published so many books, that what is my favorite might be somebody else's least favorite, and what is my least favorite might be something that somebody else really enjoys, and that's perfectly fine. But I would be curious to know, if you had to pick one, what is your least favorite Stephen King book of all time? Please put it in the comments and let me know what you think. And let me know what you think about Rose Matter too. I would be, I'm always interested in fresh perspectives. I don't want to hate any book by Stephen King. And, maybe someday down the road, I will revisit this one and try, if I can, to salvage a bit of my perception. But I'm not going to be in any rush to do that, because, dear God, there are so many other books to read out there. But anyway, thank you very much for your time. Like I said, leave your thoughts in the comments. Tell me your least favorite. Tell me what you think about Rose Matter. I'd love to read it. I'd love to learn and grow my perspective based on your opinions. But in the meantime, wherever you are, I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I will talk to you later. Bye.